Welcome back to another episode of the Shine and Thrive podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Monica, and I just finished recording such a powerful episode with Hank Paul. We dove into so much useful knowledge that you can, actually use in your life and your business to be a more inclusive human, which is exactly what the world needs right now. And Hank courageously shared with us his personal business journey of how he actually came out as a queer-owned business. He also shared how we can use more inclusive language and what that looks like and why it's so important at weddings. We also dove into learning about new perspectives that wedding photographers need to adapt in order to understand the needs of the LGBTQ plus community better. And also, we dove into what changes we need to make as wedding photographers and in general in the wedding industry in order to make queer members feel actually welcome, not just surface level welcome, but welcome throughout the process and every single step of the way during every single touch point that they experience with you. So this conversation is so valuable. I highly suggest that you tune into this episode. And just to give you a little bit of background on Hank, Hank is a full-time wedding photographer based in Sydney, Australia, and he specializes in sustainable and inclusive weddings. Hank's pronouns are he, him, and he is a lover of board games, indoor plants, and all forms of fried potato. I love that he inserted that little injection of personality in there. He co-hosts the Profit on the Margins podcast, which is a business education podcast for LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs, and he is the author of the book Queer Owned. Just incredible. So with no further ado, enjoy tuning into this episode with Hank Paul. So Hank, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited you're here. You. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation, hear all about your story, learn from you. And I know my listeners are going to be so grateful and excited to learn from you as well.
I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Yeah. And so let's dive straight into your story, your personal story of how, you came out as a queer-owned business. I was like business owner. No, queer-owned business. And
yeah, absolutely.
Some of the things that held you back from doing that and how you felt throughout the process and how you felt after.
So I started my business as a wedding photographer when I was still in high school, and I actually had never been to a wedding until I photographed one. Like the very first wedding I went to, I was paid to be there to take photos of. So for me, like that was just a whirlwind of an experience of getting, finding out what the wedding industry was like, learning how to take photos and all of that. Like it all just happened very quickly, and I was very, very young. I then started to build this brand and this business that was very much focused on what I thought to be was my niche at the time, evangelical Christian weddings. I grew up in an evangelical church, and that for me was just kind of the model of what weddings were. I was still kind of coming to terms with personally my own queer identity, and I had a lot of internalized homophobia, and there was not a lot of people in my world who knew that I was gay. I wanted to run this business, but I obviously was not prepared to put myself out there enough to say that I was gay, or I was also not prepared to be photographing queer weddings. In Australia, we didn't pass any kind of legislation that gave queer people equal rights for marriage until 2017. And so this was, a few years before that. And it wasn't really in the zeitgeist that people were talking about, gay marriage or any of that sort of stuff. But for me, I think I just got to this point where as such a young person around that kind of 2015 mark of I'd been in business for a few years, and I realized I'm building a business that does not actually reflect who I am or who I want to be. And I had to then go on this journey of there was a lot of the personal work of coming to terms with who I am and learning to love myself for my queerness. So that was one part of the journey. But then, I guess the perspective of being a business owner is how do I integrate my queer identity in the business that I run and where my values are in who I want to serve and how I want to run the business and all of those things. So that for me then kind of took me on this journey over several years of figuring out, well, I'm really proud of who I am as a queer person, and I'm really proud of the community that I get to be a part of and represent. And then now I'm like wanting to, like I started to then experiment and explore what it meant to be a little bit more vocal within my own business about what I believed and where I stood and who I was. I'm now like, a few years into that, it's 2022. So that's, it's been a really, really long journey for me. But I suppose it's that journey of finding out who I was for myself and then making a decision to integrate that into the brand that I was building. The outcome of that being that now I have a business and a brand that not only resonates with my personal values, but then people who are booking me and hiring me are also totally aligned with those values. And I would still say like the majority of the clients that I'm booking are, not queer identifying. But the thing that they have in common is that for the most part, like they're very much allies, and they see the discrimination and the marginalization of queer people as something that they can use their privilege to, stand up for. And so for me, yeah, I think I'm just now at that point in my business where everything feels in alignment, and the people who I work with and the people who hire me are all very much on the same page about queer justice and queer representation and diversity and inclusion. And so yeah, I suppose that's like my photography journey and how I navigated and moved toward being a really proud queer owned business.
That's incredible. And so along that journey, what stopped you from showing up that way sooner in your business? Or do you feel like because I know you said it took you some time, it took you some years, right? So like, what was your fear and what was stopping you from truly showing up as your authentic self?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think I want to maybe just before I dive in, just preface, I want to share what was my fear, what stopped me. But then actually there was a pivotal moment that then changed my perspective. And I'll get into that as well. So I think a lot of it for me was my religious upbringing. And there was a little bit of trauma there that really did, for many years of my life, cause me to hide and minimize myself and my personality in order to not draw attention or to try to fit the box that, my community was expecting of me at the time. And so there was a lot of fear there that I started this business photographing, weddings in the church. And if I were to ever, change the status quo about who I was, that I would lose my most loyal clientele. And that was really, really tough for me to reconcile. The pivotal moment for me or period of time was in 2017 in Australia. We had this really public and divisive debate around marriage equality. And it was during that time that there were so many people in my circle who were quite opposed to this idea of, granting equal rights to the queer community in order to marry the person that they love. And so I think it was that made me realize, oh shit, like I'm on the wrong side here. I've got this wrong. And, not to mention the fact that I personally am a queer person, and I was just perpetuating these heteronormative tropes of what marriage was without necessarily going in and advocating for my own community.
And was this when, did your family and friends already know, or were you still not in that space of not fully sharing that with everyone yet?
So the process of coming out for me was really long and drawn out. I would say by 2017, that was when everyone who was really important to me in my life did know that I was queer, but I wasn't, I certainly wasn't kind of waving a rainbow flag anywhere. And I certainly wasn't kind of introducing myself as part of the queer community. I didn't even really identify as being part of any kind of queer community. I just knew that I was gay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm very curious because it's so beautiful to me how in life, those big transitional moments of like, I think what you're talking about, was it like a snap? It was like literally a moment and you're like, I'm done. I am done. I know what to do now. Because I love those moments in life because it kind of, something happens within us where that fear that was stopping us for so long out of nowhere just like dissolves. And then we move forward confidently and unapologetically. So what do you think happened for you when you had that moment where you realized you're like, oh shit, like I'm on the right side. Wait, who am I even surrounding myself with? Right. What helped you let go of that fear and just be like confidently like move forward in the direction you needed to?
Yeah, I think what you are describing for me, I would say that was my epiphany, where you just, it's that light bulb moment.
Yeah.
And the thing that really helped me move past the fear was knowing and believing, I suppose, that the business that I have built and want to build, I don't serve it, but it exists to serve me. And like, I'm not the employee here, I'm the employer, and I'm the boss, and I'm, you know, the captain of my ship. And so this business is the ship itself, but I get to direct where it goes. And if it's not serving my values or my desires and my dreams, then I'm going to change direction.
That's so beautiful. Isn't it so cool how it always comes down to our beliefs, right? Because from what
totally.
it sounds like, your belief before, which was keeping you stuck and keeping you in fear, was if I really, show people who I am or what I stand for, I'm going to lose clients, I'm going to lose bookings, I'm going to lose business, right? But then out of nowhere, you had that epiphany where for some reason, the why of the impact you wanted to have on yourself and on the world way like surpassed your fear. Then your belief just kind of like switched into being like, wait a second, I'm like you said, I'm the captain of my own ship. I believe that I can make this business work for me. Right. And it's like, it's that belief that then reflect or creates our thoughts, and then our thoughts create our emotions, and our emotions create our actions, which create our results. So
absolutely,
that's so incredible. And it's still, to me, like when you say that all of this happened in 2017, my mind is still boggled and my heart hurts that that's still the reality of how you were feeling and what you went through. And I just don't understand how it's still a thing. you know what I mean? So my heart goes out to you. And then I am just, man, ever since 2020 brought up so many things like to the surface that I think the world really needed to have bring to the surface. And I'm going to be honest, like I'm someone who is very like, I would say welcoming to any type of human, any type of person. But what happened for me in 2020 is I realized that my website wasn't reflecting that. I was like I want to document more like walks of life and all of that. And I'm just like, oh, it's just weird. I'm just, I just don't get those inquiries. I just don't get bookings from those humans. And then I'm like, wait a second, Sarah, you literally don't have like photos that represent those humans. So why would they feel welcome with you? Right.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
even though I felt like I'm like, oh no, I'm open arms, like come in, anyone who wants to hang out with me. Right. I realized I'm like, oh, I have a lot of more learning and work to do. And so I'm really excited to, transition this conversation into, learning more about how we can show up to make everyone in the LGBTQ plus community, feel welcome, because I think that's where the shift needs to happen, because it has to start in our hearts first, in like an authentic way. Because one thing I realized, like if someone is just like wants to show up, you know, on their website showing maybe same-sex couples, be like, oh, because I want it, because maybe it's trendy now, or because I think I should, or because I want to get more bookings, that is more performative. But I find that if you truly in your heart feel pain for those that show up to your website, they don't see representation of themselves, they feel not safe and not welcome, that is what motivated me to be like, whoa, I need to make some sort of shift here. And so I hope everybody else listening can think of it that way, of like, don't just update your portfolio just to do it because it's what you should quote unquote do. Do it from a place in your heart because you want those humans to feel welcome. Because just even listening to Hank's story, like the pain that I felt in my heart for him to have gone through that and not be able to show up as his authentic self, I can't even imagine. Because, you know, all of us humans just want to be like accepted and seen for who we are. So thank you for sharing your story so vulnerably. And yeah, I'm just so excited to learn how we can all make a better impact on the world.
Yeah. I want to just kind of touch on that word that you used, which is welcome. And, you know, you said that you identify as someone who's a pretty welcoming person. And, you know, when people land on a website, whether or not they feel welcome. And I think there needs to be this shift in understanding the meaning of the word, because I reckon that there's been I think that people believe that welcome is something that you just say, and then the onus is on someone else to believe that you mean it when you say it, right? So if you're like, oh, welcome to my home, and then the onus is on the guest to say, great, well, I feel like, you know, you've said that and you mean it, so I'm welcome now. But really, it's actually up to, like, we need to flip it, and rather than it be on, you know, the person who says welcome to then, I guess, like, you know, drop all responsibility after that. Oh, I've told them that they're welcome, and so now it's up to them to take their shoes off in my home. Rather, it's that you need to flip it and say, does the guest feel the welcome that you want to convey? And that's not about just having a shoe rack at the door, and it's not about just saying you're welcome. It's like, what is everything else that you're doing in the space, and what is your body language like, and how are you communicating with them? Have you taken your shoes off? And all of those things that like communicate that they have it, they can feel welcome and feel safe. And it's the difference between, you know, what you're saying about, you know, the tokenistic, well, I've got that one couple on my website who are queer, and so that should be enough to, you know, let people know. There's the difference between that and then like genuinely asking people what their pronouns are on your contact form. You know, like there's a real difference in, I'm just saying welcome versus I've done the work and I know what it means, what my responsibility is to make someone feel welcome.
I love that. So would a good example of that be? So then, yeah, it's like, hey, welcome. And now it's our responsibility as a wedding photographer that throughout the whole experience, every single touch point, right, that they feel like they are being like seen and heard for exactly who they are, and like are feeling welcome. So would a good example be like making sure that your contract says, actually, I was going to ask you about this, what's better, because I have a regular contract for quote unquote bride and groom, which I actually want to ask you about that. And then I have a gender neutral contract, and I have partner A, partner B. But I still feel weird doing partner A, partner B, because how does a couple decide?
There's no flavor in there.
B?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so I would love to actually get your feedback on that.
So I often talk about in the queer wedding ally training that I deliver, I talk about the language that you use to be more inclusive with your couples. And it is really hard when it comes to the specific terms bride and groom, because they're so gendered, and there's not this like widely accepted non-binary or degendered term. And that's really hard for us when we're trying to build businesses that really rely on like who's the bride and who's the groom, or who,
Yeah.
tell me about person A and tell me about person B. I don't use person A and person B because for me, it's just like, that doesn't match my brand. So I don't want to talk about that. I have seen, a variety of different ways that people do it. And so for me, part of the brand that I've built is actually one that incorporates my love of board games. And so I refer to my couples, all of them, regardless, as player one and player two. And that's just like, because that's on brand for me to use.
That's smart. Yeah.
And then there's another way that you can kind of, especially we'll talk about the contract in a moment, but, when you're gathering information about potential clients and leads, that you might just ask the question, like, what's your name and what's your partner's name? Or what's your fiance's name? So that's now like personalizing it to say like, hey, tell me about you and the person that you're about to marry, rather than just like enter the bride's name and enter the groom's name here. That's just too gendered and binary for people in the queer community who are like, well, I kind of don't really want to be either of them, or, and so then that kind of comes to, your question about the contract. And one thing that I always encourage people to do is you're allowed to ask questions. And if you get a couple who, maybe one or both of them identifies non-binary, like, feel free to ask them, hey, like, how do you want me to refer to you on your wedding day? A lot of women go by bride. What would you like to be? And they might come out with a variety of different options, but, they might just want to be referred to as fiance or partner, or, I've seen one around marrier. I don't like, that's a bit of a clunky thing to say, like, I'm a marrier. But, people, and then, people choose to blend bride and groom, and you get gride or broom, and, so
gride. Actually, that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it works for people. And so it's about, rather than just like, treating people how I want to be treated, actually, it's treating people how they want to be treated. Yeah. It's speaking to people how they want to be spoken to, using labels and language that they want. Only way.
Keep going. Yeah.
I was going to say the only way that you're going to find that out is by asking those questions. And it's not offensive. It's not something where you are asking something too personal, when you are asking from a genuine, authentic place of, well, in order for me to best serve you as my client, I need to know, like, what's the safest way for me to refer to you? Because the last thing I want to do is refer to you as something that's going to be harmful or make you feel unsafe or make you feel like I've, put you in a box.
Especially on their wedding day, right? When they're supposed to feel their safest and like surrounded by all their favorite people, right? I love everything that you said. I've become so conscious of this over the years. Like, for example, in emails, or my contact form says, what are your names? That's it. And then my emails, if they fail to put both names, I say, oh, amazing. Hi, Tina. I'd love to know what's your partner's name. So I've been saying that.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, so the only reason I was asking about contracts is because I'm like, yeah, how can I just like know who is who in the contract? But outside of that, I always just use their names. Like, I'm not going to, on a wedding day, I'm not going to be like, okay, I need the bride, the groom, or the bride and the bride. Like, I'm just like, I just use their names. And sometimes when I work with wedding venues, when the wedding venue coordinator is like coming over to try to like, take over control over some photo situations, you know how that can go sometimes. They're like, okay, bride and groom, come here. And I'm like, no, use their names. It's their freaking wedding day. They're not just a bride. They're humans with like, I don't know. I don't like the terms bride and groom.
And not only is using someone's name the most inclusive way of degendering the wedding, but it's also just how you heighten the client experience. It's like, this feels personal. We feel like friends. So yes, absolutely. Using names is, again, like something that I talk about in my training, is using names as much as possible, especially if you haven't confirmed what their pronouns are. And if you're unsure, you're more than welcome to ask. It's very, very easy and straightforward to ask someone, hey, I didn't catch your pronouns. That's a very fair question to ask somebody. But if you aren't able to ask them directly what their pronouns are, then try to just use their name as much as possible when referring to them, and when you're talking to other people about them.
Amazing. I love that. I just had thanks to this conversation, I'm like, oh, that's an easy question to add into my engagement questionnaires that my couples fill out after they book with me. Just what are your pronouns? And then on top of that, I have a family and friends questionnaire, and I can have a question in there. Is there anyone I should know about that'll be present at your wedding that has specific pronouns? Is that kind of like, yeah.
Yeah. That's a great question to ask.
Okay, sweet. Yeah. Okay. And I was, where else? What else was I going to ask? Oh yeah. Okay. So I'm so curious as to, from like your perspective, what new perspectives should wedding photographers need to adapt in order to understand the needs of the LGBTQ plus community better? Because I think it should all, like, change, I think really does come from first understanding, because then we can go into compassion. And then when you're feeling compassion, you can actually take action that is just more heart aligned, and it's easier to take. And yeah, everyone benefits from it.
So I would probably start with understanding the patriarchal roots of wedding tradition, right? That there's something about how marriage for a really long time in history was this exchange of a woman from a father to a husband, and that there was this level of ownership and responsibility that the man had for the woman. And once we know that that's like the history that we're coming from, and we move into the 21st century where we now fully affirm and understand the autonomous value that women have in and of themselves without any man needed, then we start to reshift our understanding of what the value of marriage is, and why people choose to get married. And we bring it back to this really beautiful, spiritual, soul binding connection between two people who want to be together for the rest of their lives. But none of that is gendered, right? Like that's a decision that two people can make, and it doesn't actually matter what their genitals are, for example, Yeah. And so once we go, okay, well, marriage is a degendered institution that we celebrate love for being love, then every part of a wedding can also be degendered as well. And for photographers, I would say one of the biggest things that we bring as like gendered assumptions and heteronormative assumptions when we're photographing weddings is posing our couples, right? We have so many ideas in our brains of what's going to look good. Where does the bride stand and where does the groom stand? How is the groom going to cuddle the bride right now? Or how is the bride going to look up into the eyes of the groom? Like, those are such gendered habits that we have about posing.
Yeah.
And so I always want to encourage photographers to de-gender your work and find the physical intimacy and affection that your clients have that is not actually about their gender and is just about their chemistry and their romance and their love for each other.
Oh my gosh, I love that you brought that up, because I get a flashback to because I don't photograph same-sex couples that often, because I'm clearly I wasn't showing examples of that. So it's gonna take me some time, right, to have more couples like trust me with that, right? But whenever I do, I have this pause of like, I'm about to get into my habitual like prompts, right? And I had this like pause in me, and I'm like, oh wait, for example, they're both women. So wait, who's the one that actually is the one that's going to do that and that? And I'm like, oh shit, that's all stereotypical stuff. And so what I always end up doing in that scenario is which I already intuitively go with couples anyway, no matter what, is I'm just like, okay, so who's more likely to like do this in this kind of moment, and who asking those questions, right? Yeah, because you'll always get the answer of their relationship dynamic. And then that's how you can create those authentic images. no
Mm-hmm.
matter who is in front of you. So,
and, you know, if people have in their minds like, oh, I always get the groom to be the big spoon and the bride is always the little spoon, and that's how they cuddle, right? And if you kind of take away the gender and you're like, all right, well, I know that this pose is going to have a big spoon and a little spoon. I'm going to do it both ways. And not only does that then give them the opportunity to kind of, you know, figure out what's actually going to be comfortable for them as a couple, but you're also like doubling the number of photos that you can deliver to them. So it works for you that you're like, great, well, you know, we've done it one way, let's do it the other way. And then, you know, there's that photo twice over in two different, you know, configurations. So yeah, I think that even when we are shooting just a hetero couple, we're not doing anyone any favors by sticking to these gendered hetero norms. And if we start to think about, well, maybe the bride can be the big spoon, then you start to open up like a whole world of possibility of photos and intimacy and connection that you might not have actually explored as a photographer yet.
It's so true. I love that you said that. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm wondering now. So, okay. You've given so much incredible information already. I love this conversation.
I'm glad.
What are some other things that come to mind to you that wedding photographers can change or update in their business to support the LGBTQ community, make them feel comfortable? And is there anything else that comes to mind? Of what changes they can make?
So much. I mean, I think that the mindset that photographers should bring into working toward being more inclusive is one of understanding that inclusion is about bringing people in, and it's not about sending people out. And if people are afraid that they start taking or making moves in their business to be more inclusive, if you're worried about repelling some of your current ideal clientele, then, I mean, either that's because that your current ideal clientele are not values aligned, and maybe that's a good thing. But secondly, you're probably not doing it in a way that is genuinely inclusive, because inclusion is about bringing everyone in. And so I would say that like having that mindset to start with of, I can change things in my business without ruining my brand, or without becoming that, you know, rainbow waving, like super queer friendly. Like, you don't have to put rainbows all over your website to be inclusive, but it's those simple things of understanding like why do we need to be inclusive? And that's because queer people have a history of discrimination and marginalization. So we, as allies, you want to be using your privilege and your position as a business owner to make your space safer for queer people. And then, I don't know if this is like answering your question, because I'm kind of going a little bit deeper than just like what to do, but why do we do it?
Yes. Give it to me.
And so then from there, like it's evaluating every single touch point in your brand and going, have I degendered this? Is this heteronormative, or is this purely just because I'm a wedding photographer and this is
question
what happened?
Actually, since we're all learning, because I know that my listeners are going to probably be like, please explain what degender means, and please explain what heteronormative means, because these aren't words that we use on the regular. And it's, of course, we need to learn and understand them and start being able to use them.
Yeah. Okay. So heteronormative is just the way that we would refer to systems and structures in society that assume or are built upon the assumption that people are heterosexual. And if we think about like the way that the wedding industry works, there's, I mean, countless examples where you can see in businesses that they just assume that everyone who gets married in the industry is a man and a woman to each other. Yeah. And so heteronormative is, we want to challenge heteronormative assumptions to say, well, maybe it's not always a man and woman getting married.
Okay.
Does that help with heteronormative?
Yeah.
Okay. And then degendering, for me, I suppose it's because we need to move away from this um, I guess like mindset that everyone is either a man or a woman, and learning now that, you know, people can identify as being much more fluid. And, you know, we have people in the intersex community, we have people who are trans, we have people who want to, you know, kind of explore what their gender means for them outside of the societal expectations that are placed upon them. And if we want to be more inclusive, then again, the wedding industry is probably one of the worst industries for how gendered things are, because even, you know, we discussed earlier, Sarah, that there's those terms of bride and groom that are gendered, but there's not really this like one accepted term of what do we call anyone regardless of gender who's getting married. And so that's like, you know, at least in the English language, you know, and the English language has a lot of gendered language, you know, in terms of how we use pronouns and, you know, how we describe things as masculine and feminine and all that stuff. So moving away from just assuming that someone's going to be a man and a woman, and we degender things and have gender neutral, non-binary language, that's inclusive, because no one gets left out in that sort of language.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait for the day that someone coins that term and it finally sticks. I mean, someone probably has already done it. It just needs to make its way around.
I totally agree. And I've like tried to workshop even for myself. Oh, what would I use? And what do I want to make, you know, become popular? But I just can't think of anything catchy. And, you know, maybe I need to do a bit more research into where do the terms bride and groom come from, like, you know, their etymology, and maybe we could find something in history. But yeah, we need to find something, don't we?
Please be the one to do it. That would be so epic.
I'll keep go down posted, in history.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, so before we move on to you letting everybody know about your queer ally workshop, is there anything else that's on your mind, on your heart, that you wanted to share?
Oh,
I always ask it because sometimes things pop up and it's like meant to be.
Let me think about that. I think maybe just because it comes up a lot in the conversations that I have, I want to underscore that asking questions and not knowing and making mistakes is like really normal, is a normal part of the journey of being a better ally. And the worst thing that you can do is be too afraid of making mistakes that you don't make any changes and you don't correct yourself. So I would much rather someone use incorrect pronouns, you know, or, you know, use exclusive language if their intent is that they want to be more inclusive, because then, you know, and this is something that I teach in the training, is how do you then, like, when you stuff it up or when you make a mistake, how do you address that? And how do you do it humbly? How do you do it quickly? How do you do it without actually necessarily getting too caught up in, you know, how you feel? Because it you know, the emotion is something that we need to take out of making mistakes and to say, we're all going to do it. I make mistakes and I'm queer. I still stuff it up, but it's about the intent. It's the genuine desire to be more inclusive and to be a better ally. That is what people should be striving for.
Yes. Okay. I love that you said all that. A lot of things I love doing on this podcast is doing things that scare me in front of everybody listening, that make me uncomfortable, to then show them that it's okay and they can do it too. So funnily enough, like, I'm a very like deep thinker and I think about so many interconnected things in the background. So going into recording this episode, I'm like, I'm not an expert in this area. I have so much to learn. Right. And I could have been like, oh my gosh, what if I asked the wrong question? What if I did? But I'm like, no, like that, me asking these questions because I actually care and I want to grow and learn and share this knowledge with everybody is what, if everyone just did that without the fear of like screwing up, like how much more quickly would we get to a world of equity, right? So I asked these questions, and even asked you, I'm like, so should I be using partner A, partner B? Like, well, am I doing that right? Just so my listeners can also be like, okay, maybe it's not that scary asking questions, right?
It shouldn't be scary. And Sarah, I really do appreciate the attitude that you've brought and the mindset that you've brought into this conversation, because I've felt your openness, I've felt your willingness to learn, and it makes all the difference, because this is about creating a safe space, and you've made this place safe for me to be able to share. And so that's what allies are able to do in their businesses, and when they're at weddings, when they're working with couples, is you don't have to have it all right, but by coming in with this it's the genuine desire, the genuine intent, that's what helps foster the safety. And you've really done that for me. So thank you.
Oh, of course. Okay. Please let us know a little bit more about your Queer Ally workshop that's coming out really soon. So
yes.
yeah, I'm definitely signing up. So I cannot wait for you to tell everybody about it, and everybody needs to sign up. This is information we all
Amazing.
need.
Yes, please. So if you want to learn more about how to be a better ally in your business and how to work with more queer couples, then you can head over to www.queer. Oh, I'm going to have to say that again because it's got to be smooth, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to learn how to be a better ally in your business and work with more queer couples as a wedding photographer, then you can head over to www.queerweddingallies.com. And there you'll find that I'm offering some training for $27. And it's all about how to be a more inclusive wedding ally. And we cover a whole bunch of stuff. We'll start with the kind of fundamentals of LGBTQ plus 101. We'll look at the history of, queer identity and queer language, and looking at the spectrum of, what it means, to be binary and non-binary. We then will go into specifically working on your business as a wedding business. This is something that's specifically for wedding photographers and wedding businesses, because I know that it is an industry that is super gendered, and we will audit your whole business touch points, or all of your business touch points, and look at how we can make it more inclusive without repelling your current clientele and the current people that you're serving, but rather bringing more people in. That's more clients for you. It's doing more good for communicating the values of inclusion and diversity in the world. And then we're going to wrap things up with how to be a better ally and advocate in your business and personal life. So all of that is $27. It's about 2 hours worth of training. And I'm really excited. I've got some great kind of bonus PDF guides and checklists and things that you're going to, be able to use as resources along the way. And I'm also currently working on a queer inclusive photography prompt guide. And that's going to be full of prompts that you can use for couples when you're photographing queer couples. I mean, it's also going to be relevant for non-queer couples, but it's going to be, obviously we talked about, it's going to be degendered, and we're going to kind of take away those heteronormative assumptions in posing and prompts and purely focus on the physical intimacy and affection that couples have with each other and drawing that out. So that's all available for you at www.queerweddingallies.com.
Oh my gosh, that's seriously value packed. Like that's a freaking
for $27. Yeah. So just like I've made it super accessible and affordable, and it's going to make a huge difference in your business. And you're going to be able to walk away not with any kind of like tokenistic, I've just done that one thing, but it's actually genuine inclusion for your business.
Oh my gosh, that's unbelievable. I'm so like grateful and proud of you for like doing this for our Earth. Like this is just an incredible impact that you're having. And for all of because a lot of my listeners are Canadian, and a lot of them are just general North America. So for all of you, it's off season. So this is the perfect time to learn and implement.
Totally.
Like the perfect time.
It's going to be very practical. A lot of stuff that you can change, like as you're watching, things that you can update on your website, reviewing your social media, all of that stuff. I'm going to give you all of that. It's when I went into creating this training, I needed it to be practical. I couldn't just do the theoretical, because I know as a business owner, and I have signed up for so much online workshops and trainings and all that stuff in my life as well. And the ones that you walk away and can actually go and do practical things in your business to make it a better business are the ones that I feel like I get the most out of. So that's what I've really, really tried to do in this training.
I love that. It's so true. I prescribe to the same thing because action is what creates results and not knowledge. You need to put knowledge into action in order to see change. And oh my gosh. Thank you so much for your time, everything. And then one last thing, where can everybody find you and connect with you if they want to
absolutely
slide in your DMs,
slide in my DMs. Yes, I'm single. Hit me up.
I love that.
You can find me on Instagram at Henry Paul Photography. And I suppose you could find me online at henrypaul.com.au, because I'm from Australia. But otherwise, hit me up on Insta. That's probably the social media platform that I use most.
Amazing. And everything will be linked in the show notes, his workshop, his Insta. So in case you missed it, you're driving, you can just click back to the show notes. All right. Well, thank you, Hank, so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you, Sarah. I've had a blast. Thanks for having me.